Welcome, welcome, welcome to episode 21 of the American System of Political Economy with none other than the world's leading authority on the subject of the American system. Drum roll, please. Mr. Neil's expertise on the subject of the American system continues to grow in leaps and bounds as Neil every month goes into the archives and he pulls from where the British and their co-thinkers think or thought they've confined a lot of these individuals. They thought they had confined these individuals into the trash bin of history, but as ideas go, you can kill a man, but you cannot kill his ideas. These are ideas whose time has come, and these ideas are roaring back with a vengeance. And so today, Neil is going to be introducing one of those historical gems, none other than a gentleman that Neil introduced to you in a previous episode of the American System podcast, Mr. John Lord Hayes. Somebody who you should know, somebody who should become your friend. For 4 decades, he was a major factor in political economy. He not only represented the woolen manufacturer's interest, he was for the Fleece and Loom and much more. For 4 decades, he was a major factor in political economy. Hayes was not a woolen man. He was the president of the 1882 Tariff Commission. He defended domestic commerce in the United States. He wrote a pamphlet refuting the Cobden Club that was endeavoring at the time to use the Western farmer as the instrument to destroy the protective tariff. He wrote a pamphlet in praise of the machine tool sector, and he wrote a pamphlet called The Fleece and the Loom. But it was not just about the fleece and the loom. Who will want to downplay domestic commerce? The British. The British raised concerns about the tariffs that Austria, Sweden, Spain, and Russia had on their woolen industry. The British wanted to be the workshop of the world. Protective tariffs will be detrimental. Protective tariffs served to establish and keep domestic commerce. But the British wanted nations to go with comparative advantage, an advantage that they did not have. Continental Europe could also advance in the industrial arts, and so could Russia. And America, what is so dangerous about the fleece and the loom? It places domestic commerce first over foreign commerce. The British did not like this. The fleece and the loom produces economic independence. Comparative advantage creates a colonial economy. One trade partner is the master, England, and the other, a colony, the world. Is establishing colonies the best way to promote man in the image of the creator? Who are the colonies? Who was the master? What was the only economic policy ever pushed by the master? What say did the colonies have? The USA issued Britain with the first ever Declaration of Independence. Is this an indictment on the colonial economy? The British cannot stand this. Only she is allowed to use protectionism. And there's to be no fleece and the loom. The post-Kearns free trader will not recognize this. They have no vision for labor. They do not see how you employ people is your view of man. They have no high view of man. Man is just an animal. The fleece and the loom, the Colbert economy, will not bring about centralization. It will have a harmony of interest in each country. It will employ labor in such a way that will say man is not an animal. Man participates in the intelligence of the Creator, and not employing man in the industrial arts is no way to seek our Father's kingdom. The industrial arts are the domain of Minerva, not the domain of man as a slave of nature. Can it be? The fleece and the loom, who would have ever thought that a praise of the industrial arts, true economic freedom, fighting protectionism, and a high view of man will have its subject, the fleece and the loom? What can employ man in a way that expresses a high view of man mean? To express seeking our Father's kingdom say about man. What kind of culture and economy do we need to embrace the fleece and the loom? The fleece and the loom is not just the fleece and the loom. It is a key to a higher view of man. This is something the British would not be proud of man for doing. The fleece and the loom gave us economic independence. Comparative advantage has a black eye because sovereignty is more important than irrational free trade. So that was just a brief intro. Without further ado, I introduce to you the man, the legend, the world leading authority on the subject of American system of political economy, none other than Mr. Neil Martin. Take it away, Neil.
Okay. So we got the first slide up. John Lord Hayes, The Fleece and the Loom, The Revenue and Blood of England. Man is worthy before the infinite maker. Next slide, Victor. The Fleece and the Loom, an address before the National Association of Wool Manufacturers at the first annual meeting in Philadelphia, September 6, 1865. John Lord Hayes, Boston Press of John Wilson and Son, 1866. Next slide, Victor. This is a hand-drawn picture of John Lord Hayes. Next picture. This is a picture of a power loom. I don't know how old it is, but the power loom played a major part in industrialization, in the Industrial Revolution for Europe and the United States of America. Next slide, Victor. Here we have a poor investment into the future. This picture shows how degenerate the culture is. This is world Western pop culture. This Western pop culture does not have man seeking the kingdom. It doesn't have man being worthy before the infinite maker, which is God. Next slide. We're going to refer to this abomination later on. Next slide. Okay. So John Lord Hayes was a instrumental. The slide went away, Victor. The slide went away, Victor.
Give me 1 second. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay.
Is the slide back?
Yes, it's back.
Yeah, keep going.
All right. Wool growers and the woolen industries have a harmony of interest. So when John Lord Hayes is saying that the wool growers and the woolen industries have a harmony of interest, it did it again, Victor. John Lord Hayes is saying that the wool growers and woolen industries have a harmony of interest. They do not need to rely on foreign trade. What they should rely on is having the future proud of us, and they have a part in doing that. So here's what John Lord Hayes said. We believe that the mutuality of the dependence of the two industries has been demonstrated by the experience that the wool growers have always been prosperous when the prosperity of the manufacturing interests secured them a home market, and that the seasons of depression have been only when the depression of manufacturing has diminished the home demand. But it is not enough for us to believe or even prove all this. There can be no reliance upon a permanent friendly legislation for both interests unless the wool growers are satisfied. Our object is not to reach Congress, but to convince the farmers of the West, who will inevitably control the legislation of this country, of the absolute identity of our interest. Okay, so John Lord Hayes has just said that there is a mutuality of the dependence of the two industries of wool growers and wool manufacturers. A better way to state this is to say that there is a mutuality of dependence of all industries in the United States of America. What does this mean? As the title said, harmony of interest. When John Lord Hayes is talking about the mutuality of the dependence of of the two industries, he's going to take you somewhere where the free trade crowd will never do, right? You can't just think of the fleece and the loom as just the fleece and the loom. You have to think of it as an economy. You have to think of it as the Colbert economy, right? You have to think of it as an economy that is going to support domestic commerce to the utmost extent, right? And one thing that we have to know is that the British, they don't want home markets. They want a globalization. They want world markets. They don't want home markets. They do not want domestic manufacturing, right? If we have a situation where the wool growers were saying, oh, we don't need protectionism, we don't need a home market. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So the British do not like home markets, right? They want for they want for the woolen industries and all industries to depend on foreign trade, buy in the cheapest market. And when you do that, you don't place sovereignty first. Now the thing is, right? As I said, the mutual, the fleet, the fleece and the loom, the mutuality of the dependence of the industries, right? This is going what I'm going to do. John Lord Hayes is going to take you on a ride on political economy to a whole new level, right? The mutuality of the dependence of the two industries or of the industries has a government philosophy. They have a better government philosophy than buy in the cheapest market. And what do I mean by that? Well, the buy in the cheapest market crowd is not going to circulate the currency properly, right? It's not going to have currency irrigation. You know, like water management projects that provide water to the land, the currency is not going to be used for that. And it's not going to be used for that because the nation has decided to buy in the cheapest market. This is the United States of America for the past 50 plus years, right? Now, I'm saying the Fleece and the Loom has a government philosophy that free trade doesn't have. What is the Fleece and the Loom? Pursuing that policy, which means that you acknowledge that there's a harmony of interest, which means that you acknowledge the mutuality of the dependence of the industries. Now, here we have a situation, right? The buying in the cheapest market crowd have a pathetic government philosophy. Why do I say this? Well, first of all, the scholars that they have don't have people learn about nations. They don't have countries making allies. They have the countries making enemies, right? Their foreign policy is not a long-lasting foreign policy. Credit is not for making the future proud of us. There is no currency irrigation. Laissez-faire is king, right? We don't want that type of government philosophy. We want the government philosophy that is going to do this. The mutuality of the dependence of the industries will gift wrap credit for increasing the potential relative population density and energy flux density of the economy of nations. Research and development is seeking our Father's kingdom, not man as a beast. So far we have credit is being used properly in a very creative way. Research and development is about developing the human mind and having us increase, right? What we see, we have a national debt. Nothing's wrong with a national debt, right? The national debt of the country that has a mutuality of the dependence of the industries, their national debt is comprised mainly of infrastructure projects, right? The infrastructure of the country that has a mutuality of the dependence of the industries dwarfs the infrastructure of the buy in the cheapest nation, right? The view of man for the mutuality of the dependence of the industries is much higher than the view of man of the buy in the cheapest market nation, right? All right. So when you have a harmony of interest, it's best it's the best friend of the labor, right? When you have a harmony of interest, you have the best diversity of employments. You have the best association. And what else? Well, the mutuality of the dependence of industries. Gee, I wonder what that government philosophy did in the 1860s in the United States. Well, you had a civil war, but during the Civil War, the Transcontinental Railway was being built. Did the South promote any large scale infrastructure projects with their cotton is princess philosophy? Nope. What about the British? Did the British ever do groundbreaking infrastructure projects that increase the energy flux density of her colonies in India or Australia or Canada, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southwest Asia? Nope. Buying in the cheapest market is not going to develop man, right? Now, the mutuality of the dependents of industries, they are responsible before their God and fellow man, not the comparative advantage crowd. The comparative advantage crowd has no powers that can have us be the immortal species. They have no responsibilities. They do not go by the golden rule. So, what I'm trying to convey is that the mutuality of the dependence of the industries has a better government philosophy than laissez faire and buy in the cheapest market, right? We were in a battle with the British, right? We wanted the philosophy that said the mutuality of the dependence of the industries. What does this mean? This means fighting the British. If you're going to fight the British, you have to promote harmony of interest. If you're not promoting the harmony of interest, if you're not promoting the mutuality of the dependence of the industries, you're not fighting the British. And how do we fight the British? Do we fight the British by manipulating man like how they do it? Or do we fight the British by organizing man because he is fundamentally good? We organize man because he's fundamentally good. We know that mankind wants the future to be proud of us, right? Now, the British wanted to make sure that the harmony of interest, the mutuality of dependence of nations wouldn't exist. So they wanted to get the Western farmer on board of free trade, right? John Lord Hayes says we have to organize the Western farmers, right? And how are they going to organize the Western farmer? They're going to teach the Western farmers all about protectionism, something that needs to be done today, right? They need to know that protectionism has a greater government philosophy than free trade. Free trade has no government philosophy. You want to look at free trade's government philosophy? Take a look at the economic policy of Europe and the United States for the past 50 plus odd years. You cannot tell me that is a government policy to have mankind be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. Victor, go back to the abomination slideshow. All right. This is not the harmony of interest. This is manipulating mankind. So this right here was brought over to the Western farmers in the United States of America. It might not have been the same people or the same style of dress, but degeneration, manipulation, brainwashing. That's what the British excelled at. Go back to the slide, Victor. Next one. Next one. All right. So the mutuality of the dependence of the industries is going to organize man. Those that are for the mutuality of the dependence of the industries, what will they organize civilization around? They would organize man as in the image of the creator and not manipulate them. The British do not like this. The mutuality of the dependence of the industries. Do the British know how monumental this is? They are not going to tell us that, right? So the British are not going to tell you why the harmony of interest is so important. They're going to tell you buy in the cheapest market. Laissez-faire. You have to respect comparative advantage, right? Now, as I stated again, the title, The Fleece and the Loom, that is the revenue and blood of civilization. Are the British going to allow for the fleece and the loom to be the revenue and blood of civilization? Or is it just for them? Next slide, Victor. What the British sought to keep a hold of at all cost. So the British didn't want nations having the fleece and the loom. They didn't want them having domestic commerce and association, right? So here's what John Lord Hayes says about the British statesman. It had become a deep-rooted sentiment of British statesmen of every party that their highest duty to the state was the encouragement of their own manufactures, and first of all, those of wool. For so many years, their chief export and peculiarly national staple, eminently the foundation, as it was called, of English riches, and the flower and strength, the revenue and blood of England, the wool sack, upon which the Lord Chancellor of England had sat for ages as the President of the House of Lords, is a symbolical tradition of the importance which the nation has always attached to the woolen industry. How come the British statesmen don't want other countries doing what they're doing? Protecting the wool industry. The British protected the wool industry in the most way, right? They saw the wool industry as a foundation to English riches. But what I'm going to touch upon, they saw the wool industry as the revenue and blood of England. Now, this presentation is about the fleece and the loom, the wool industry. The British are going to do everything in their power to expand the wool industry. What are they going to do to expand the wool industry? Are they going to promote the mutual dependence of the industries? No. They are going to promote comparative advantage and laissez-faire and free trade, right? How would the British get countries to go along with having the British be the workshop of the world wool manufacturing wise? How would they do that? Well, as I said, the British statesmen who had different views, they were aligned. They were aligned, however, on that the wool industry in England was the most precious thing in England, right? So the British they saw the woolen industry as the revenue and blood of England. Did Smith, Malthus, Ricardo, McCulloch, and Mill see the woolen industries as box office? Did they see the woolen industries as the revenue and blood of England? Someone might be saying, Neil, what do you mean by revenue and blood of England? Well, let's take a look at what is needed to have a wool industry. You needed sheep. You needed wool manufacturers. Hold on. If there's wool manufacturers, you probably need a machine tool sector, right? You will need a machine tool sector to build the machines for the wool industry. Ah, a big light bulb should come on, right? So if the British don't want other nations to have a woolen industry, are they also saying you're not going to have a machine tool sector? Because if you destroy their woolen industries, you're going to destroy their machine tool sector. And hey, what are the British going to say? Well, you have comparative advantage with us. You don't need to have a woolen industry, right? Here's what you need to do. The thing that you produce the best, you should export that the most. And there's always going to be buyers for your goods. That's a big lie, right? So as the British statesman stated, the revenue and blood of England is the woolen industry. How are the British going to get more markets for their wool sector? They will have to make a fool out of the nation. They will have to make a fool out of the nation. They will have to make a fool. They will have to make a fool out of the nation that has a woolen industry. How would they hoodwink them? Right? And yes, I'm saying the British tricked and hoodwinked countries by using treaties to destroy their economies. I said, well, hold on. I said, wait, did I just say the British would hoodwinkle and trick nations with trade treaties to destroy their economy? I thought all type of trade with England was prosperous. I thought that England was 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 bringing people back to life quicker than what Christ could do. Yes, I still believe that. Nothing is wrong with the British. If the British want your wool industry or your home markets, they genuinely think that what you produce the best should be offered to the world. And that's all you need. You don't need to have a universal economy. You don't need to have a mutuality of the dependence of the industries. You don't need to have association. Now, the next slide is going to be about the Methuen Treaty in which the British hoodwinked Portugal. Next slide, Victor. The British make their trade partners look like sorority girls. Yeah. The British make their trade partners look like sorority girls. Okay. In 1703, England, having in view principally the interests of the woolen manufacturer, made the Treaty of Methuen, by which, in consideration of certain favors to Portuguese wines, she secured the free admission to Portugal of her woolen goods. The English historian might well say, this treaty have proved very advantageous to England in the woolen trade particularly. But this treaty was a mortal blow to Portugal. Her manufacturing industry disappeared. While all Europe progresses, Portugal remained stationary. The few of her products shown at the Great Exhibition in 1862 were noticed only for the melancholy representation which they gave of her industry. The measures of protection which were most significant of the devotion of England to her manufacturing interests were the prohibition for nearly a century and a half of the exportation of British wool. So John Lord Hayes is saying something that the free traders online who talk about the Methuen Treaty will never say. Portugal was destroyed by the Methuen Treaty, right? Now, one thing that you have to know is that there were 8 protectionist writers. They could possibly be more. James Anderson, Matthew Carey, Frederick List, Henry C. Carey, John Lord Hayes, William Elder, Robert Ellis Thompson, and Van Buren Denslow, who wrote about the Methuen Treaty being a complete disaster for Portugal, right? James Anderson was a Scottish economist in the time of Adam Smith's days. Matthew Carey, the father of Henry Carey, was a great economic historian, publisher, and economist. Frederick List, I've given 2 presentations on Frederick List. Frederick List is one of the best political economists ever. Henry C. Carey, the GOAT of political economy of the 19th century. John Lord Hayes, the second best political economist of the latter half of the 19th century. William Elder, a good friend of Henry Carey. Robert Ellis Thompson, a student of Henry Carey, and Van Buren Denslow, right? So 6 of these people were American protectionists. One was a British person, one was German, and the other 6 were American, right? America has a rich tradition in political economy, right? This rich tradition in political economy loved domestic commerce. What happened to the domestic commerce of Portugal? It was wiped out. It was wiped out. And because of what? Because Portugal wanted to sell wine to the British. They sold their birthright, which is domestic commerce. Every country's birthright is domestic commerce. They sold that birthright to sell wine to the British. The Portuguese are making sorority girls look like geniuses. I can't understand why the Portuguese would go with that type of policy, right? Who would ever say that, oh, you're going to sell the British wine and the British are going to sell you woolen goods? That's a beautiful trade. You know who said that? David Ricardo. David Ricardo said the Methuen Treaty is a perfect example of comparative advantage. He said a country selling wine, exporting wine, and importing manufactured woolen goods is a perfect example of comparative advantage. What's comparative advantage? If someone says, yeah, we should go with comparative advantage, they might as well said, yeah, we should headhunt domestic commerce. And if you headhunt domestic commerce, what are you going to do for your industrial arts, for your mechanical arts? You're going to destroy them. And if you destroy them, what do you think of labor? Right? In looking at the way that John Lord Hayes defended Portugal and wanted something better for Portugal, we see his view of man. We see his view of government, right? Now, if we say, well, Neil, the British, they had good intentions with these economic treaties, with this economic treaty with Portugal. Well, I got news for you. The British modeled the Methuen Treaty. They used the Methuen Treaty in a whole rack of economic trade treaties with continental Europe. One of them was the Eden Treaty in France, which virtually did the same thing. It destroyed French industries for quite some time, right? Why are the British doing this? Why do the British think that in order for them to stay on top, other countries have to be at the bottom and they have to be continually suppressed and manipulated? Why do the British think that? The reason why the British think that is because they have a horrible government philosophy. They have a horrible view of man. And if you have a horrible view of man, what are your expectations for man? What are your expectations for the laborer? Is the laborer just supposed to remain the laborer? We're going to find out about this later on. Next slide, Victor. This is going to be this is a goodie. Protectionism is ruining the British huge foreign trade. So part of England's huge foreign trade was their woolen industry. Remember, the statesmen of England had to do everything in their power to make sure that the woolen industry in England was number one. But not only that, we're going to take the woolen industry global. There is no such thing as home markets. There is no such thing as national sovereignty. And here it goes. John Lord Hayes receives a report. In the reports of the Bradford Chamber of Commerce for 1864 to 1865, kindly sent me by our consul at Sheffield, Mr. Abbott, who has charge also of the vice consulates of Bradford, Leeds, and Huddersfield. I find bitter complaints of the tariff regulations of Austria, Sweden, Spain, and Russia, as affecting most injuriously the woolen trade of Bradford. Oh, the protective tariff was ruining the woolen trade of England. Oh, I feel so sorry for the British. Not. The Austrian tariff is spoken of as presenting features of the most objectionable character, while the duties are almost prohibitory and unjust to England. Oh my gosh, protectionism is unjust to England. Man, this is worse than being anti Semitic. The Swedish tariff is referred to as having the unfortunate distinction of disputing with Spain the debatable honor of being the highest in the world, the Russian alone accepted. Okay, the British see protectionism as objectionable. They see protectionism as unjust to England. Does England control the birthright of every country? Is it to the best interest of civilization for the British to have the whole world market to themselves and for there to be no home markets at all? I mean, what are the British doing? The British are saying that protectionism is unjust. If they say protectionism is unjust, I have something for them, right? The British said protective tariffs are unjust. What? Seeking domestic commerce is unjust. The U.S. Constitution is unjust then, because all the U.S. Constitution wanted to do was promote domestic commerce, employing the currency in useful employments. That is unjust and anti-Semitic. Promoting labor is unjust and anti-Semitic. A national banking system with public and private credit is unjust. Making the future proud of us is unjust and anti-Semitic. There will be no promotion of the general welfare. Striving for economic dependence is unjust. Why would you listen to someone who says the protective tariff is unjust? You got to be stupid to actually take into consideration that protectionism is unjust. Protectionism is unjust. Hello? Protectionism secures the mutuality of the dependence of the industries. That sets you up. That that sets you up for a wonderful government philosophy. And I have already stated that that same government philosophy is behind the Transcontinental Railroad. It is behind the national debt being strategic and having massive ties to the infrastructure projects. The mutuality of the dependence of the industries will increase diversity of employments. It will concentrate on growing association. How is that unjust to civilization? Well, something being unjust to the British is not unjust to civilization. Because the birthright of every nation, domestic commerce must be protected, right? When the British are saying protectionism is ruining their huge foreign trade, we should be celebrating. Next slide, Victor. Europe does not want a playbook built on comparative advantage. Europe wants a Colbert economy. They do not want a playbook built on comparative advantage. Now, what is comparative advantage? If something's cheaper, you buy it from the seller that sells it the cheapest. And what you try to do is that you try to what you make the best or make the cheapest should be your number one export, right? You're going to have all these countries vying in foreign trade and not in domestic commerce. You're going to have countries giving up their birthright, destroying domestic commerce, and being whores for foreign trade, right? This is what the British want, right? This decline in the arts continued until the time of the Crusades, which affected a complete revolution in industry and commerce. The Crusaders found in Asia the scattered fragments of the sciences and arts, and among others, the processes for making those rich fabrics which had formed the most luxurious vestments and furniture of the Romans. The states of Italy were the first which availed themselves of these discoveries, making the mechanical arts auxiliary to the commerce which they had revived on the ancient course of navigation to the east. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Florence, Venice, Pisa, and Genoa had arrived at great perfection in manufactures. In those states, we had the first brilliant illustration of the influence of the industrial arts. So we're going to take three sentences, right? John Lord Hayes said that in the time of the Crusades, because of what they found in Asia, they were able to complete a revolution in industry and commerce. They focused on industry and commerce. Now, when you focus on industry and commerce, you're not really thinking about buying in the cheapest market. You are dead set on making discoveries that will improve civilization or improve your nation, right? A complete revolution in industry and commerce When do you hear of Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, John Ramsey McCulloch, and John Stuart Mill talking about this? We don't hear them talking about this, right? And so another thing, the states of Italy were the first which availed themselves of these discoveries, making the mechanical arts auxiliary to the commerce. Ah, the mechanical arts helped out commerce. Hmm. Malthus doesn't speak about that. Ricardo doesn't speak about that. Uh, McCulloch, John Stuart Mill, they don't say you have to improve your mechanical arts to improve your commerce. They don't say that. That's not their advice to foreign nations, right? And then we go down to the last sentence, right? In those states, Florence, Venice, Pisa, and Genoa, in those states, we have the first brilliant illustration of the influence of the industrial arts. The industrial arts is very important for commerce, right? Now, the industrial arts led to a revolution in industry and commerce, right? Now, if that led to a revolution in industry and commerce, what type of discoveries were made? Hmm. It must have been groundbreaking discoveries. And when you make discoveries, you elevate man. But we're dealing with the dismal science. They don't want to elevate man, they want to belittle man. How did the dismal science belittle man? Did free traders ever talk about how to have endless economic growth? No. They love to belittle and limit man. You cannot take energy flux density out of endless economic growth. Commerce, such as Adam Smith, buying in the cheapest market. Malthus saying food grows arithmetically and man geometrically. Ricardo's man cannot replenish the earth and subdue it. John Ramsey McCulloch saying the question whether the home or foreign trade be most advantageous is quite obvious, that it admits no satisfactory solution. John Ramsey McCulloch is just saying, who cares about what's the difference between domestic commerce and foreign commerce? John Stuart Mills, man has not lessened his burdens with technological advancements, and that man is a cancer to the earth by the environmentalists, are not going to have a high view of man. Essentially, they are not going to be moved with a drive that cherishes energy flux density, but John Lord Hayes was, right? So what I just did, right? I gave you sayings of the environmentalist movement and a satanic British economist, which will tell you they are not interested in increasing the growth of civilization. What are they interested in? They are interested in belittling man and making sure man thinks of himself as having no responsibilities and he is a slave of nature, right? So here you have a school of political economy that wants man to be a slave of nature. How can that school of political economy embrace the fleece and the loom and see domestic commerce is the birthright of every nation? They're never going to do that. If they're never going to do that, why do they hold so much clout? It's just a shame. It is just a shame, right? That school of political economy will never advance. Look at it now under man as a beast. Are the industrial arts valued in the West? Is labor more in a culture that celebrates the industrial arts or attacks it? Victor, go back to the abomination slide. They are not celebrating the industrial arts. Repeat again. They are not celebrating the industrial arts. They will never produce an economist like John Lord Hayes. They will never say that man is to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. They will never say that we have to seek first our Father's kingdom. They will never say anything like that. Go to the next slide now, Victor. Next slide. Oh, Europe does not want a playbook built on comparative advantage. The question was presented to the continental nations whether they should accept the cheap tissues of England or at some sacrifices repel them to appropriate to themselves the labor and profit of their production. The latter course was successively adopted, with some modifications, by each of the continental nations, and with what results to their own wealth and the industrial progress and comfort of the world. Instead of a single workshop, Europe has the workshops of France, Russia, Austria, Prussia, Belgium, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, each clothing its own people with substantial fabrics, each developing its own creative genius and peculiar results, each contributing to substitute the excellence of competition for the mediocrity of monopoly, each adding to the progress of the arts and the wealth and comfort of mankind. The British do not want Europe to have a playbook that rejects comparative advantage. The British do not want continental Europe having a woolen industry or industries of anything else, right? They want to be the workshop of the world. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, when the British is the workshop of the world, they have the birthright of all the countries. You don't have domestic commerce. You have trade with us. That's what the British are saying. You don't have domestic commerce. You have trade with us, right? What is this going to do for civilization, right? We already seen that John Lord Hayes is saying, you know what? We need an excellence of competition. How do you get an increase of the excellence of competition? Domestic commerce, domestic industries. That's how you get an increase of domestic competition, right? The British say, no, 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 no. Trade with us. That's a monopoly. No, it's not a monopoly. It's buying in the cheapest market. It's comparative advantage. The only time it's a monopoly is when you're defending your home market. We're not defending our home market. We're importing all types of goods into England. We just want to sell you manufactured goods, and you're going to be our little bitch. That's the British, right? The British do not want Europe having having a playbook that promotes domestic commerce, right? The British do not want countries knowing, or specifically continental Europe knowing, that they have a mutuality of the dependence of the industries, right? Now, what does Europe want? Europe wants to develop its own creative genius and peculiar resources, right? Who would object to a nation developing their creative genius in the population? Victor, Go back to the abomination slide. This is not developing creative genius. This has nothing to do with genius at all. This is an abomination before Jesus and the Lord. It's an abomination before the future, right? They will sell their birthright, destroy domestic commerce, and be whores for comparative advantage and free trade. Go back to the original slide, Victor. All right. So developing its own creative genius. This is statecraft, right? This is the story of mankind progression. The story of mankind progression. So if this is a story of mankind progression, John Lord Hayes says something even more interesting. Each adding to the progress of the arts and the wealth and comfort of mankind. Abominations do not have the arts progress. They don't increase wealth. And they do not supply any type of comfort to mankind. Right? People have to think of it this way, right? The British are not going to have civilization be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. They're going to put abominations before you and say, this is your culture. They're going to put abominations before you and say, you have to promote comparative advantage and buy in the cheapest market, right? This presentation will tell you why the Methuen Treaty happened. It will tell you why the Methuen Treaty happened, this presentation, right? Europe does not want a playbook built on comparative advantage, right? John Lord Hayes said that continental Europe made the right move by not listening to the British. Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo and Rick and John Stuart Mill are saying you did the right thing by not listening to the British. They will never say that. The post-Carnes free traders will never say that too. And the post-Carnes free traders, something's up with them. I think they they make Ivy League they make sorority girls look like Ivy League students, right? That's the post Carnes free traders, right? The post Carnes free traders think that harmony of interest is too costly. They think harmony of interest doesn't do, doesn't doesn't promote fiscal austerity. Of course it doesn't. The harmony of interest promotes creativity in the government, right? Continental Europe and Russia, they were not going to be creative governments as long as they listened to the British when it comes to political economy, right? The British would rather have continental Europe at each other's throat than having them be protectionist nations. How do I know that? World War One, World War Two. All right, next slide, Victor. Okay, now these are the last two quotes. It is obvious to John Lord Hayes that man was not an animal, right? The free trade school thinks man is an animal. If you think mankind is an animal, how are you going to elevate mankind? How is mankind going to leapfrog technologies? How is mankind going to make discoveries if you say mankind is an animal, right? What type of mission are you giving to mankind if you say mankind is an animal? If you had a teacher who repeatedly told his students that mankind is an animal and they are slaves of nature, what will they become? The credit of your mills and the honor of your houses will be the most certain fortunes for yourselves and the best legacies to your sons. But it is not enough that you should be content to keep up the old standard of your goods. The highest attribute of humanity is the passion for perfection, the aspiration for some unattained ideal. The noblest man stamped these aspirations upon all their earnest works. They are no longer workmen, traders, they become artists. Art is not found alone in painting and sculpture. It is in the domain of Minerva. Man, that's powerful, right? So John Lord Hayes is saying, listen, um, you can provide for your family all you want to, but that's not going to be your legacy. Your legacy is making the future proud of us, right? Your legacy is you're not just a workman, you're not just a trader, you're going to become an artist, right? And then John Lord Hayes says something which is so provoking. He says the highest attribute of humanity is the passion for perfection. Victor, go back to the abomination slide. This is not a passion for perfection. This is a passion for degeneration. Victor, go back to the previous slide. Next one, Victor. All right. Okay. So, a passion for perfection. This is increasing the energy flux density of the economy, right? When it was said that a national debt is a curse, eventually we had people saying a national debt is a blessing. Why do I say that is a blessing? It produced fruit. What type of fruit did it produce? It produced the subject on the report of manufacturing by Alexander Hamilton, right? That report in of itself increased the potential relative population density of America. It increased the energy flux density of America. It's not even technology. It's government philosophy, right? Then we go over to technology, right? We have the horse-drawn carriage. We have the wood power train, the coal power train, the gas power train, the oil power train, the electric train, the high-speed rail magnetic levitation train. Now, all those people that built those modes of transport, were they thinking that we're all done there? No. We kept on making progress, right? Same thing with energy. We went from burning wood to coal, hydropower, gas, oil, nuclear power, right? That is man being an artist. That is not man being a trader or a workman. That is not man being a slave of nature. If man was a slave of nature, he wouldn't be writing the stuff that John Lord Hayes was writing. He'll be writing the stuff that John Stuart Mill and David Ricardo was writing, right? And then we go into the next phase where it says mankind has an aspiration for some unattained ideal. Well, one of the unattained ideals for mankind is fusion power. Now, the unattained ideal for the abomination that we were showing before is a man having a working vagina. That's their unattained ideal. We don't need that type of stuff in civilization. That's going to have mankind be forever a slave of nature, right? And then we have become an artist. Art is not found alone in painting and sculpture. It is the domain of Minerva. Taylor Swift is not going to get us in the domain of Minerva. Lyndon LaRouche is going to get us into the domain of Minerva with its 4 economic laws, being global Glass-Steagall, back to national banking, credit to improve the energy flux density of the economy, right? Developing nuclear power, going all out on the manned space program, actually being committed to it fully. Crash program to develop fusion power. That is art. Victor, go back to the abomination slide. That's not art. I wonder where Taylor Swift is at. I don't see her. Okay, Victor, back to the slide. Okay. Now, John Stuart Mill is more in the domain of Minerva than pop stars, right? Pop stars leave no legacy to civilization. Who's going to leave the best legacy to civilization? People who think like John Lord Hayes and people who think like Lyndon LaRouche. They are going to give the best legacy to civilization. Next slide, Victor. Okay, so free traders, what do they want man to be, right? We've already seen John Lord Hayes says man is not just a worker. He is not just a trader. He's an artist. John Lord Hayes improves upon that theory. Okay. As Mr. Ruscio said in his art lecture to the manufacturers of Bradford, if you resolve from this first, that as far as you can ascertain what is best, you will produce what is best on an intelligent consideration of the probable tendencies and possible tastes of the people whom you supply. You may literally become more influential for all kinds of good than many lecturers on art or many treatise writers on morality. I will add, this is John Lord Hayes, by such noble work, you rise above the sphere of common labor. You become more than the workman, more than the artist. You become creators, imitators, though humble, still worthy of the great worker, the infinite maker. The goal, the mission, the mission for the immortal species, which is man, is to be worthy before the great worker and infinite maker, right? John Lord Hayes is saying every human being should strive to be worthy before the great worker and infinite maker. He can't do this if he thinks he's a slave of nature. He can't do it, right? We need this type of thinking. And why do I say we need this type of thinking, right? Mankind, the story of mankind should be man is not just a common laborer. Man is not going to be a workman for long. He's not going to be an artist for long. He's going to become a creator, an imitator. He will be worthy of the great worker and infinite maker. Now, what type of economy do we need if we are going to be worthy of the great worker and infinite maker? We're going to need a John Baptiste Colbert economy, right? In order to get a John Baptiste Colbert economy, we're going to need to have a high view of man. And John Lord Hayes is already supplying us with that. But guess what? Right? We have two people. We have Adam Smith and we have Helga Zepp LaRouche. Adam Smith had a disgusting view of man. Helga Zepp LaRouche had a beautiful view of man, right? A beautiful view of man will want mankind to strive to be worthy before the great worker and infinite maker. Adam Smith would say that's not your bowling lane, right? So this is from LaRouche's So You Wish to Learn All About Economics when he's talking about Adam Smith, right? The administration of the great system of the universe, the care of the universal happiness of all rational and sensible beings is the business of God and not of man. To man is allotted a much humbler department, but one much more suitable to the weakness of his powers and the narrowness of his comprehension, the care of his own happiness, of that of his family, his friends, his country. But though we are endowed with a very strong desire for these ends, it has been entrusted to the slow and uncertain determinations of reason to find out the proper means of bringing them about. Nature has directed us to the greater part of these by original and immediate instincts. Hunger, thirst, the passion which unites the two sexes, the love of pleasure and the dread of pain, prompt us to apply those means for their own sake and without any consideration of their tendency to those beneficent ends which the great director of nature intended to produce by them. It's safe to say that Adam Smith was one of the most disgusting political economists ever, probably the most disgusting, right? I'm sorry, I don't think mankind is going to make too many discoveries with a love of pleasure and a dread of pain. Where's the work ethic? If we want to make discoveries, we need to have a work ethic, right? What is a work ethic to Adam Smith? A sex drive. Yep. He says this the passion which unites the two sexes. That's all we need if we want to develop the most profound technology. The passion which unites the two sexes. Victor, go back to the abomination slide. They should just call that Adam Smith. Now go back to the last slide, Victor. All right. Now I promise a quote from Helga Zepp LaRouche. Helga Zepp LaRouche wrote something very revolutionary, which says that man must be worthy of the great worker and infinite maker. It was her 10 principles for a new security architecture and development architecture, right? And here's what she said. This is the 10th principle. The mindset, no, hold on. The basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul, and being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome. All right. I'm banking on Helga Zepp LaRouche's 10 principles. The reason why I'm banking on Helga Zepp LaRouche's 10 principle, because this is the most profoundest way to say man is in the domain of Minerva. He has passed the domain of Minerva, and he is worthy of the great worker and infinite maker. Who would ever think that this will be said concerning the fleece and the loom? The fleece and the loom has to be thought more about. Mutuality of the dependence of the industries needs to be thought out more. You're going to get to the realm of government philosophy. Government philosophy, as stated by Helga Zepp LaRouche, is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind. That is a splendid, wonderful view of man. Now, the abomination, that abomination slide, they don't think that way. Unfortunately, we have people calling this art, right? That's not art. That is promoting thermonuclear war, because the people that do not want the fleece and the loom want thermonuclear war, right? Adam Smith would not stop thermonuclear war. Helga Zepp LaRouche would stop thermonuclear war. Protectionism would stop thermonuclear war. John Lord Hayes did us a great service when he wrote The Fleece and the Loom. And I'm done. Thank you.